Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time a little bit later this hour talking about immigration for all sorts of reasons. The caravan, as well as the deployment of National Guard troops to the southern border, and the citizenship question on the census forms, and a variety of other reasons that we'll be talking about that later. But just to break it up a little bit, I wanted to come back to an issue that we've discussed from time to time, and that is the issue of these tariffs and whether or not we're headed towards a trade war. The most recent issue of our Outlook magazine deals with the issue of trade and some of these trade deals. And, of course, just the other day we talked about how China announced new tariffs on about 106 U.S. products. And also, of course, the president saying in some of his Twitter posts that we're not in a trade war with China. That war was lost many years ago by the foolish or incompetent people who represented the United States. And, of course, we've also posted in the past a piece by Stephen Moore, The Art of the Trump Trade Deal. And we now have also posted one by our next guest, the Trump issue. Trump finally gets the United States to flex its trade leverage muscles. And one of the co-authors is Michael Stumo, who is a chief executive officer of the Coalition for a Prosperous America, has been a lawyer, obviously, with the law office there in Massachusetts in the past, also in Connecticut and Nebraska, a graduate of Iowa State University with a law degree from the University of Iowa. And Michael, appreciate you joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
The article that you've posted is so valuable because it talks about how the president renegotiated a trade deal with Korea. We're hearing a lot of hue and cry and complaining about China, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But if I understand your article, it does seem to me that some of the threats that the president has made have had a positive impact in terms of our deal with South Korea. Explain if you might.
Sure. South Korea is far more dependent on trade with the U.S. than we are with them. And in the past, the naive free trade folks just thought, well, if you drop tariffs, everybody's going to get rich. That turned out to be wrong. Ended up every other country just gamed the system. They did things like manipulate their currencies, subsidize their big companies, kept other barriers besides tariffs in place. And so after we signed the Korea trade deal in 2011, our trade deficit with them doubled. They sold a lot to us. We didn't sell much to them. So Trump is, rather than fearing, oh my, we're going to upset our trade partners, he is acting first. He's creating leverage with 232 steel tariffs on what's called steel overcapacity around the world.
Yes.
And threatening to withdraw from certain trade agreements. So he's creating new leverage to try to get back to reciprocal trade and hopefully to a future of strategic trade when we actually sell more than we buy.
You use a phrase there that we've talked about before. We've talked about the military, unilateral disarmament, but you called it unilateral trade disarmament. And I think that's important because as much as everybody around the table, and we're going to have a round table tomorrow with Penna Dexter and Dr. Merle Matthews, and in the past we've had Kelly Shackelford and all sorts of other people. We all believe in free trade, but it's smart free trade. And what happens oftentimes is, as you say, free traders and academics have urged us to preemptively move all of the trade barriers. In other words, if we act nicely, everybody else will act nicely. And in the real world, that just doesn't seem to work very well, does it?
No, we actually started that in the 80s under Bush 1, and under Clinton we dropped our tariffs first, saying that, well, this is the way to go, and everybody else will follow our lead because we're a leader and everybody wants to be like us. But no, they want to take advantage of us. They didn't follow our lead. And tariffs are just about 1/10 or 1/20th of trade. You've got, all the currency issues, currency manipulation. You've got a lot of subsidies. These countries have very strong industrial policies to promote their national champion industries. That's all in the mix. So we've never achieved free trade. I don't know if we ever can, but it's really a strategy. And the true strategy here is the global competition for good jobs and industry. That's really the real politic.
Again, if you would like to join our conversation today, we're going to keep Michael on for about 2 segments. So I know some of you may have comments or questions. Feel free to give us a call, 800-351-1212. And this article is the first one we've posted. We just call it Trump and Trade, but it comes from The Hill, which is kind of the organ of record for Capitol Hill. Trump finally gets the United States to flex its trade leverage muscles. And if you find people saying, yeah, is this going to really help the United States? This is going to hurt the farmer. It's going to hurt this, and then the other. Here's at least a positive. And one more example I want to use before we take a break, and that is you talk about automobiles. Currently, South Korea has capped its annual intake. In other words, the number of U.S. automobiles that it would allow to be sold or even actually exported to South Korea at about 25,000 per manufacturer. But you also point out that cap would never be achieved because there are all sorts of other restrictions. Remove the restrictions, and now they've raised it to 50,000 cars. That's good news for car manufacturers, isn't it?
I hope so. We'll see, actually, because it's actually 25,000 cars per manufacturer. And the underlying point here is that these free trade agreements that are 2,000 to 5,000 pages, they're not free trade. They're just a remanaged trade.
Yeah.
So Korea never opened up its markets to all of our automobiles. They had a quota of 25,000 per manufacturer. Our companies couldn't even meet it because they had a bunch of other restrictions in place, which auto parts, different environmental restrictions that are different than ours, et cetera. So we never even met it. Now, 2 things as they happened, which you mentioned, there's more than that in this, the Korea deal the president made. But as to autos, 1, they double the cap to 50,000 per manufacturer. 2, they remove some of the significant restrictions. And we'll see if that happens. But people complain about us being now moving toward America first. Korea was Korea first. And they have a very economic nationalist mindset that's enforced by their trade associations and the like. They just don't buy foreign. They're very close to Japan. They don't have any Hondas and Toyotas on the streets.
Yeah,
so we'll see if this works. I hope so.
Well, and that's a good point, because when we come back from the break, I want to talk about some others, because, whether we look at pharmaceuticals, of course, the issue of steel. China, of course, for some time has been producing more steel than anyone needs, and so obviously they're trying to flood the market. But also, are we in the midst of a trade war? So let's, if we can, take a break. But if you'd like to join us, some of you certainly have some comments and questions about free trade and fair trade and tariffs and all sorts of other issues. That's why I wanted to keep Michael on just a little bit longer, so you'd get a chance to not only read his article, which is available at our website, pointofview.net, or you can simply go to thehill.com, either way, and find it. But also wanted to give some of you a chance to ask some questions or make some comments. So again, 1-800-351-1212. Later this hour, we'll get to the issue of immigration, because there's a lot on the docket, not the least of which is, what about sending National Guard troops to the southern border? Where are we in terms of this caravan that's been making its way from the southern border of Mexico, most of those people from Honduras, and heading towards the United States? And then, of course, we've talked a little bit about the citizenship question on the census. So a lot of what we'll talk about today will be immigration. But if you have a comment or a question about trade or exports or imports, we'd love to give you that opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation on this topic right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
During this election season, we will once again see how divided we are as a nation. We see a map of red and blue states and even have maps showing red and blue congressional districts. But there is growing evidence that we aren't just a divided country, we're essentially two countries living within the same border. Bill Bishop made this case many years ago in his book, The Big Sort. Americans have sorted themselves into various enclaves that are often so separate from each other that they might as well be different countries. Consider the fundamental differences between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats want to live by their own rules. They hang out with their friends at parks and at other public places. They think that religion and politics shouldn't mix. Democrats watch Sunday morning news shows and late-night television. Republicans go to church. They spend more time with family, get their news from Fox News or the radio, and own guns. Republicans read sports and home magazines, attend Bible study, frequently visit relatives, and talk about politics with people at church. They even differ on their preference of pets. Democrats are more likely to own cats. Republicans are more likely to own dogs. Michael Barone commented in one of his columns that most Americans choose to live in a place that is culturally congenial. Most people in the San Francisco Bay Area wouldn't consider living in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, even for much better money. Most Metroplexers would never relocate to the Bay Area. I lived in both places and can validate Michael Barone's conclusion. Yes, we're a divided country, but we're more than that. We are essentially two countries within the same border, hardly on speaking terms with each other. This is the challenge for any politician in America. Trying to bring people together is difficult when we're essentially two countries within the U.S. border. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Michael Stumo for a few more minutes, again with the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We'll talk about some of the material on his website. And, of course, we've posted this article that he co-authored on the subject of free trade, and in particular on the issue of Donald Trump finally gets the United States to flex its trade leverage muscles. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Tanner, listening on WPWB. Tanner, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What's your point of view?
Thanks. I agree with Michael. One of the things I've experienced, having worked for international companies and had traveled and worked overseas, lived in Europe, worked for a Japanese company, is Americans assume that these other markets that we are trying to export to and compete in are like our own, and they simply aren't. These other countries have far more protective regulations and simple rules to prevent American companies from competing on a level playing field. So I'm really glad to see Trump kind of call out China and some of these others. I mean, they literally flood our market with products at a cost loss for them many times to protect their steel industry or protect different aspects of what they're doing. And then they severely limit the access that U.S. manufacturers or producers of goods have. So there might be a short-term hit to the soybean producers or peach producers. I know that may hit our state a little bit, but the long-term is to get those people to recognize that it truly isn't free trade. It's, a very restrictive environment outside the United States. We probably have the freest market of any and have allowed these other people to reap the benefits of it, while not getting the same benefit of trying to reach Indian or Chinese or European consumers.
Right.
So that was my point of view. Thanks.
It's a very good point of view, and appreciate that. Michael, your thoughts about that, because I sort of alluded to that a minute ago, but Tanner picked up on it. We always assume, whether it's foreign policy or trade or anything else, that we assume that other countries are like ours, that there's no corruption, that there's a freedom of inquiry, that there isn't any kind of manipulation of the market. That just frankly isn't true, is it?
No, it's not. Not even in Europe, who we think is more like us. I alluded to Korea being Korea first. Well, Germany is Germany first, and France is France first, et cetera. Germany actually has a bigger trade surplus with the world than the U.S. does. They don't have a China problem. They actually are a net exporter. They export far more than they import to and from China than we do. So does Japan. So does Korea. The only patsies in the game are us. We're the ones who sit here and absorb everyone else's overcapacity as they overproduce, employ their people for growth, rely on our consumers to fund their growth, and gut our manufacturing and our production.
Tanner raised a good question. Could we for a while take a hit? And of course, it's all happening during an election year, so I can see that whether it's soybean farmers or, you fill in the gap, but let's just take those, soy, cars, and chemicals. And some of those people complain and say, I don't like Trump and I want to get a Democrat in office to actually close down all of these tariffs, and I want to turn the Congress away from Republican control to Democratic control. Or even if they don't do that, just the amount of complaining that obviously will happen because there aren't any indications that China is going to back off in the near future, maybe from some of those tariffs. And so what about that? That is going to create a fair amount of economic uncertainty and chaos. Markets don't like that. People don't like that. And most importantly, voters don't like that.
Right. Well, as to the market issue, most of the market reports here, it's just noise. It hits for a couple, 3 days, and then it bounces back to the fundamentals. So I'd suggest just treating the market reports as noise. Even with regard to the soybeans, soybeans is a global market. If the U.S. doesn't sell to China, Brazil will, and then we'll sell where Brazil did. So it's multilateral exports. The bilateral changes, meaning between us and one other country, is just noise. The big fundamentals, and I come from an Iowa farm.
Yes, that's why I use the example. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I would treat that just as noise. But the Democrats are in an interesting position because they've opposed these trade deals more than Republicans in the past. In fact, the more bitter opponents of Trump's trade strategy are GOP globalists. And so the Dems are kind of getting a little bit more what they wanted because Obama was horrible on trade. And so they're in a bit of a bind and not sure what to say. I
was just thinking about that. You were kind of anticipating my next question because in some respects, when it was NAFTA or GATT or the World Trade Organization or, of course, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which did not happen, and a number of others, many times it was Democrats, especially unions, that were concerned about these kinds of issues. And Donald Trump's doing the kind of things that a lot of the Democratic leaders said we should have done a long time ago. So it will be interesting to see how some of those individuals in the campaign run against this. But let's come back to the other positive. We use South Korea as an example. But you also in your article say there's a silver lining that many countries have grown excessively dependent on selling to the United States, and they badly need continued access to America's consumers. So in some respects, because the United States is sort of a market of last resort, we can maybe set China aside for just a minute. But I think if I read your article carefully, we're going to see more successes like we've just had with South Korea. What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely, because we're the biggest consumer market in the world. We have more leverage than anyone as a result. Now, regardless of that leverage, our national interest is in balancing trade because if you have a trade deficit, if you buy more than you sell, that's a net job loss. We're about 4 or 5 million jobs underwater because of our huge trade deficit. If we're a trade surplus, we have a big job gain. That's what other countries do. And so regardless of what they think and leverage and the like, if we simply reclaim our sovereignty and get a relative balance of trade over time and then let the free market work from that, that's fine. But certainly in these negotiations, there is no country that has power over us, and all the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and media hype that says we can't offend our trade partners is the opposite of the truth.
Let me for just a minute before I let you go, talk about the fact that on our website, pointofview.net, we have a link to your website, Coalition for a Prosperous America. You can go to prosperousamerica.org, but we already have the link there. You've done a number of studies on a variety of different issues, and whether it's what might happen to the steel and aluminum tariffs and the whole issue of the trade deficit and a variety of others. But talk about, if people wanted to know a little bit more, obviously we've posted your article here that was in thehill.org, or hill.com, I should say. But we also have a link to prosperousamerica.org. What can we find when we land at your website?
Sure. Well, you can find everything on trade, everything that Trump is doing, what you should think about trade that cuts through all the noise, prosperousamerica.org. You can even sign up for free to get information periodically when things come up. But the key point is here, we've got to focus on building production and jobs and wealth creation here rather than cheap consumer goods. That's how you build a country, and there's more bang for the buck focusing on production and jobs in this country rather than minor consumer goods savings with cheap imports, which put us out of work.
Well, and again, if you have the repatriation of all sorts of money that's been overseas coming back to this country, you also have the lowering of the corporate income tax. There are some things that I think are set to really begin to develop that kind of manufacturing revival and resurgence that might actually take place because of some of the things that happened last year.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of that. Some of my manufacturing members understand I've got far right to far left in our group. We've got labor all over to the Tea Party, but they all agree on this. But yes, the tax environment makes it some more beneficial for some industries, and certainly to fix trade, in our view, would be extraordinarily powerful.
Yes. Well, again, a bipartisan coalition of farmers and ranchers, manufacturers and labor groups, and really trying to develop a national strategy to eliminate the trade deficit, to create good-paying jobs, and to deliver broadly shared prosperity to America. So if you're not familiar with the Coalition for a Prosperous America, go to that website. We have a link on our website. And Michael, thank you so very much for writing this article. Thank you for joining us here on Point of View, and I suspect we'll call on you again in the future.
Thank you, Kirby. It's been a pleasure.
We're going to take a break, and I'll take some more of your phone calls. I did want to get Tanner in there before the break, and if you have some comments about trade or finances or exports, imports, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to all the immigration questions. Send in the National Guard to the southern border. What does that mean? That's the first issue. We have this immigrant caravan in Mexico, Pueblo Sin Fronteras. What does that mean to us if indeed they land at our border, and what's going on there? And I thought I'd at least get into a little more discussion about that controversy surrounding the citizenship question in the census. That should cover us for a half an hour, and then we'll get into some other topics in the next hour. Let's take a break, though. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As I said earlier in the week, I suspect we'll be talking about immigration for some time, and there's obviously some reasons for that. First of all, of course, you have this caravan that's been making its way from Honduras, going through the southern border of Mexico and heading towards the southern border of the United States. Now, the argument is the caravan has been disbanded. I don't really believe that, and so that's one reason for that. Number two, of course, you have right now Donald Trump ordering the fact that we would have National Guard troops there. And the argument has oftentimes been, well, why do we need this? Mr. President, you've been telling us that the number of people coming here illegal has dropped. And that is true. But we also see the caravan coming, and that's one. Number two, we have an economy that's improved rather dramatically, so it's made, again, the United States attractive to individuals who would want to come here. And number three, we just had a passage of an omnibus spending bill that actually prohibits the building of a wall. Now, you can refurbish the existing wall, but that's not the same, and not that everybody that wants to come to this country pays attention to what passes in Congress, but some of the organizers do. And so that's why we have, as it says here in the Washington Times, President Trump signed an order yesterday deploying National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to boost security while he pressures Congress to deliver more resources to build his wall, hire more Border Patrol agents, and make it easier to deport new illegal immigrants. Homeland Security Secretary said it's just too early to know how many troops will be sent, what their exact role will be, or how much it will cost, but she did suggest that it would be along the lines of the deployments that we've seen in the past from President George W. Bush and Barack Obama, who sent the National Guard in assisting intelligence gathering, construction, and surveillance, which also is a good answer to the other question or criticism that comes up, and that is this is unprecedented. Actually, it's really not unprecedented. You can find examples where President Ronald Reagan, President George Herbert Walker Bush, President Bill Clinton, President George W. Bush, and President Barack Obama have sent National Guard troops. And before I take some of the phone calls here, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's get some comments, and one comes from Representative Louis Gohmert, who's been on the program with us before. He said President Trump's announcement to defend the United States border with National Guard troops is sensible, prudent, and has plenty of precedents. He talks about the fact that President Obama did the same thing as did President George W. Bush, with reports of thousands of Central American migrants leading and heading towards an illegal mass entrance across the U.S. border, which basically is an unauthorized invasion of this country. President Trump chose to stand with the American citizens and the American law. He says the move will not only aid in the defense of our law and our sovereignty, but will also prevent gang members, drug smugglers, sex traffickers, and terrorists from hiding within civilian invaders, as was described by the former FBI Director James Comey, because that has happened before. He finally also says it's also critical to note that indeed on March 102 years ago, a liberal Democrat, President Woodrow Wilson, ordered an estimated 75,000 National Guard troops to protect the same southern border after incursions across the U.S. border by Mexicans led by Pancho Villa. This effort placed National Guard military troops at our southern border 102 years ago, effectively sealed our border from further illegal raids into the United States. And so, again, he says it's about time to effectively secure our border once again so that those who are entering illegally can come in and those who are basically coming in illegally do not. And I love his line, if a liberal Democratic president can do it, we know it can be done. He's always having a little bit of fun with that. And, of course, we also have Gary Bauer of American Values be with us next week during our Truth Team discussion, pointing out, as I mentioned just a minute ago, that Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama deployed National Guard troops to assist the Border Patrol. He says, here's something to keep in mind. We have been on high state of alert ever since 9/11. That is why we have to take off our shoes and risk getting patted down in order to board an airplane. He says, yet the left insists we can't stop unknown people from crossing our border. How can you reconcile these two things? And I think that is, of course, the very important issue. And, of course, as he points out, 17 states, 7 cities announced yesterday they're joining a second round of lawsuits against the president's plan to add the citizenship question to the 2020 census forms. I will get to that in just a minute. But let's, if we can, take some calls. And let me just hasten to say that when we talk about illegal immigration, this isn't, anti-Hispanic or anything like that. Whether an individual is here because he or she has overstayed their visa, they came from Canada or Germany or Singapore or China or Japan or whatever, or whether they have crossed the border and they're from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, we have to have some kind of law and order. We have to have some kind of rule of law. Certainly that is the case. We also allow 1 million people every year to come in legally. And at the height of some of the illegal immigration, we sometimes had as many people coming in illegally, 1 million, as we had people coming in legally, 1 million. And, of course, when you come in here illegally, that's going to get to the conversation we'll have just a minute ago. Oftentimes they don't fill out the census form because they want to stay in the shadows. They go and work at places where they get paid cash. They don't have any kind of workman's compensation because they're, again, in the shadows. And there are all sorts of reasons why that is not helpful to them or to us. And we can talk about that for some length of time. But that's one of the reasons why it's important to have a secure border and an orderly process by which we bring people in here. And, of course, also why Congress needs to address the fact that we have millions of people here. The stated statistic is 11 million. I think it's a lot higher than that, of people that are here illegally, and to come up with some kind of answer for those questions as well. But let's take some phone calls and give you a chance to express your opinion. The program's called Point of View, so we want to hear your point of view. So let's go to the state of Texas first. Letty, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, hi. I don't know if you can hear me well or not because I'm outside, but
we'll do our best.
Okay, so I live in the Rio Grande Valley. I'm not but 20 minutes or less to the Mexican border.
Yes.
And the people across the country that don't live within this area don't actually know what it is like to live around here. We have a lot of people from other countries, mainly Mexico, right? And we have a lot of violence going on around here.
Yes.
And I have no problem with people coming over as long as they're legal and go about the rules and stuff, right? But, a lot of people are against immigration for whatever reason, but if you don't live within the U.S.-Mexican border, you really don't know what it's like.
I appreciate your comments. It's a little hard to hear, but again, it I think underscores what we just heard as I read the piece from Representative Louis Gohmert. Gang members, drug smugglers, sex traffickers, sometimes terrorists. I mean, you just don't even understand how extreme it can be unless you've gone to that border. And so, Letty, I appreciate you calling in. And let's see if we can take at least one more phone call before a break, and we'll head to South Carolina this time. Richard, what would you add to our conversation today?
Hi, how do you do, sir?
Good. Come on, go ahead.
Well, I'm just calling to, I just want to emphasize that every sovereign nation in the world has a right and a duty to defend its borders and to regulate the flow of traffic coming and going. And the United States, above all, should be doing that. My family were immigrants just a generation ago, sure. And they came over the right way. They worked. They gained citizenship, sometimes through military service, and in time of war. In fact, that's how my two grandfathers, maternal and paternal grandfathers, gained their citizenship, was during World War I. And it was just there was an accepted way of doing it. And for anybody that says that we had open borders back in the day, they're wrong. We didn't. Now, our southern border, I know we have a special relationship with our neighbors to the south, but, we've gotten to a point now where it's not just a matter of coming and going, between families. It's a situation of coming here illegally and staying here, and you hit it right on the head. A lot of people don't want to come out of the shadows. They like being able to come and go as they please, and that's not allowed with other countries, and it shouldn't be allowed with our neighbors here in North America.
Well, and the point I was trying to make, too, and I want to keep you over the break if I can, is that lots of times people say, well, we should have compassion towards people that are here illegally. And I agree, because what is happening right now is that these are individuals that find themselves being exploited and taken advantage of, because who do you protest work conditions if you're here illegally? So I want to come back and get some more of your points, but we have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Veterans memorials are symbols meant to remind the living of the service and sacrifice the fallen made for freedom. That is why Gold Star Mothers in 1919 started work on the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial. They did not want the world to forget the sacrifice their sons made, so they, along with the American Legion, erected a cross-shaped memorial. The design mirrored the universally accepted symbol erected over the thousands of graves of men who died in Europe defending freedom. No one complained for almost 100 years. Recently, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit refused to overturn an opinion of a panel of that court that would direct a federal district court to consider whether the monument should have its horizontal arms removed or be razed to the ground completely. Such a decision sets a dangerous precedent for veterans memorials across America. If this decision stands, other memorials will be targeted for destruction as well. First Liberty Institute will appeal this case to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of its clients, the American Legion. I encourage you to go to don'ttearmedown.com and join us in defending this memorial to the 49 men of Prince George's County, Maryland, killed in the line of duty during World War I. We forget what we do not see. Unless the Supreme Court intervenes, the Bladensburg Memorial and similar memorials in close by Arlington National Cemetery may disappear as well. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention in the next hour we're going to be talking with David Ferguson, and he is an award-winning author and lead pastor, by the way, of Chicago's Community Christian Church. We're going to be talking about Hero Maker. I think you'll really enjoy that, and gets us away from some of the conversation which we need to have, of course, about this issue of immigration. And I think Richard's comment is a good one, and that is we have individuals that are right now living in the shadows. Some of those individuals are here for one very good reason. They want to support themselves and their family. They pursue the American dream. But unfortunately, when you have a caravan of individuals that are heading towards our border, as we learned before from the FBI director, James Comey, who's been in the news a lot for all sorts of other reasons, including his new book coming out, there have been those who will hide within that, and some of them are terrorists. Of course, we've had the incursions in the border. We heard a little bit from Letty about that just a minute ago in terms of what it's like to live in some of these border towns, and so this is why the president has felt it is important to send the National Guard. And if you hear people say, well, this is unprecedented, I think I answered that question, didn't I? Let's see, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama. Okay, that's 5 previous presidents that in one way or another have had National Guard troops at the border for different reasons, and obviously not quite the same as this one, but nevertheless, that's the case. And if indeed you say, well, why now? Well, I think we already answered that question as well. We just passed an omnibus spending bill that essentially prohibited the building of a wall. If you really want to get down to the fine print of some of that, we have the economy improving so dramatically that it's another magnet again for individuals that want to come and enjoy what could be the prosperity for America and for those who come in. And most importantly, you have this caravan that is making its way northward. And for those of you that actually listen to the local program, I spent a little bit of time an hour ago talking about how we're not only getting sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, but we're now starting to get sanctuary houses of worship. Some of these churches are housing individuals there as well. But I did mention just a minute ago this issue of the census question. And again, let's give some history. The Constitution mandates a survey of Americans every decade. That's in the Constitution. And for more than a century, the Commerce Secretary is the one that has discretion over the questions that the census takers must ask. So in most administrations, that would be the end of it. But not in this case, because Donald Trump is the president, and so just about everything he proposes is, what? Controversial. Now, why is it being asked? Well, the Justice Department asked census officials to include a question about citizenship. Why? Because they have to enforce what's called the Voting Rights Act. Now, we can have a debate, and I have before, about whether or not we even need this anymore. It was implemented back in a time when there were barriers for African Americans to be registered to vote. We had Jim Crow laws. We had all sorts of questions that were used to prevent individuals from voting and all sorts of things. That's really not happening today. But okay, we still have the Voting Rights Act, and you have to then apportion various states according to the citizens. And certainly have to make sure that in one way or another you can get the accurate location of voters, because after all, only citizens can vote, right? Okay, so that should be, again, something. And so that's why they ask. They didn't demand, they just simply ask that the census actually consider asking that question. Now, of course, what you've heard as the criticism from the attorney generals, some of you live in the state of California, the attorney general there. Some of you live in the state of New York. You've seen the attorney general there. Now, many of them have said that this would lead to an undercount of blue states and affect congressional representation. No, it wouldn't, because we count both citizens and non-citizens in that. And the example I've used before, people hate to think about it, but we used to count slaves. When we had slavery, we counted them. Okay, I recognize we counted them 3/5, and we can get into that debate another day. But the point is, we're not going to not count individuals if they're not citizens. But the argument is well, yeah, but immigrants may not necessarily be as inclined to answer this question. I'll get to that question in just a minute. But as I pointed out yesterday, this is not going to lead to an undercount just in blue states. It could lead as easily to an undercount in red states. And I used an example yesterday, but let me use it again. You look at certain towns that have more than 10% of their population that are undocumented immigrants. McAllen, Texas, Yuma, Arizona, Gainesville, Georgia. Those are all red states. So first of all, this argument that it's only done by President Trump to hurt blue states is kind of fallacious. But the second one is of concern in this sense. When the census question has been in the long form, most people answer it anyway. The biggest problem has been that illegal immigrants oftentimes will not fill out the short form. That gets back to the conversation we had with Richard just a minute ago, because guess what? They kind of stay in the shadows. And so the problem, now you could make the case that maybe the problem will be worse, that we'll have even a higher percentage of people that won't fill it out because they're asked if they're citizens. But the bottom line is we've had a problem for some time trying to get some groups to fill out the forms or to answer the questions of census takers. The citizenship question doesn't make it a lot worse because it's already been an issue to address. But the other issue I thought I'd put on the table is, a lot of our liberal friends always say, why can't the United States be like the rest of the world? I mean, after all, we're one of the few countries that doesn't have the metric system. Why can't we be like the rest of the world? We have a Second Amendment. Most of the other countries have very significant gun control laws. So we're always being told, why can't we be like the rest of the world? Well, when it comes to the census, well, why couldn't we be like the rest of the world? You mean like Australia that asks whether or not you're a citizen? Oh, like the United Kingdom, like it asks whether or not you're a citizen, because after all, many of those do. And of course, we've asked the question about whether you were a citizen on the short form until about the 1960s. And then there was an attempt to truncate the form so that people would be more likely to fill it out. The fewer questions, the more likely they would fill it out. And of course, the question has continued to be on the long form. But and nothing else, I think it helps you understand that this is an issue that only is controversial in some ways simply because Donald Trump is president. Let's take one more phone call real quickly. In Texas, Michael, love to hear your comments about this issue. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
I just wanted to say, being a first-generation American from my mother's side who was born in Mexico, her father, my grandfather, actually came over illegally. He did it the right way. He worked very hard to get his citizenship and provide for a huge family that lived in Mexico to bring them over legally.
Yes.
But I agree. It's we have to have some kind of protection because the world has changed and it's gotten more difficult for Americans to get work. And also it becomes more dangerous because we have such a high issue with terrorism and drug trafficking and stuff. I actually have family that still live in Mexico who are very south, and they struggle every day with drug trafficking. And
yes, I know. I feel sorry for anybody living in Mexico right now. I mean, the drug traffickers and, of course, the sex trade and all the rest. And, Michael, I hope you'll call back because I'm kind of up and near a break here, and I'd love to hear your whole story. So you are certainly invited to come on and share some of that tomorrow. But since I have one of those breaks coming up, I would certainly want to make sure that we get out on time. And when we come back, we'll spend some time kind of changing the topic. We can only talk about immigration for so long. And David Ferguson with us. We're going to talk about Hero Maker. I think this is going to be just a great opportunity for you to think about what you can do to work on the leadership of individuals and also maybe be encouraged about what can happen in inner city situations as well. So I'm going to be chatting with him and talking about his new book. And of course, we, as always, encourage you to join us in the last hour, but also to join us tomorrow. We have our weekend edition. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Penedextra, will be with me. We'll be back right after this.
Rebecca Hagelin has been influencing public policy as an author, columnist, and executive at places like the Heritage Foundation for more than 30 years, and Point of View Radio stoked her fire.
I used to turn it on every day, and when my husband would come home from work, I would say, this is what they said on Point of View today, and this is what they said. I just wanted to be connected into the places where I could make a difference.
Rebecca has made a big difference with her life, and let's just say she's a big fan.
There's no better resource, there's no better truth sayer, there's no better place to go for information for people who are worthy of their money than Point of View.
Point of View makes a difference by inspiring and informing people who make a difference. And you can make a difference today when you invest in the Truth Team. Join us today. Find out how by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join us today, we are going to be talking about making heroes. And again, we're going to be talking about this new book, Hero Maker. And it is written by Dave Ferguson. He is an award-winning author and lead pastor of Chicago's Community Christian Church, which is actually a multi-site missional community church, which is really trying to have an influence in that area. And it is a book that talks about hero making and some of the essential practices of that, and even how to address those issues. So if you would like to join us as we have this conversation, we certainly welcome you at 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that even though we're going to move past some of the conversations we've had today, we do have some articles that are related to our conversation the last hour, the one called Trump and Trade. Also one that I quoted yesterday, we didn't really get to today, by Bobby Jindal, called Trump Keeps Promises. And then we also have one on YouTube censorship, and, of course, information about this book, Hero Maker. So lots of great resources available at our website, pointofview.net. And next week, let me just mention that we will be doing our Truth Team event. We'll be hearing from a variety of different individuals, so we hope that you will join us then. We bring now to the microphone Dave Ferguson, which, again, is an award-winning author and lead pastor of Chicago's Community Christian Church. Dave, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, talk about what it means to be a hero maker, because that's really kind of obviously the theme of your book. It's broken into a couple of charts, sections about challenge, some of the practices, and getting some results. But I guess we need to define the term, first of all, don't we?
Sure. I think one of the things is we look in kind of probably into the leadership world in general, but I would say particularly as we address the church leadership world, I think some of us, we find ourselves kind of trying to be the hero. And that sounds like a noble cause, but what happens is everything kind of tends to focus on us and having us in the spotlight. But the shift is kind of going from a good to a great thing. Instead of just trying to be the hero, what you do is you begin to make heroes of the people around you. I have a buddy who's really, I shouldn't really say a buddy, a mentor of mine who's there in the Dallas area, a guy named Bob Buford.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
Bob was a guy who, he talks about it at halftime where he made the move from success to significance. And I think you could also call that shift a shift from trying to be the hero to being a hero maker. And he had this phrase he would always use that I've kind of adopted in my own. I've been around him enough. He would say, "My fruit grows on other people's trees." I love that. My fruit grows on other people's trees. And I think hero makers are people who go like, you know what? The spotlight doesn't have to shine on me all the time. What I do is I build platforms, and I let other people stand on them, and my fruit grows on other people's trees.
Well, one of the other things he always has said is that anything of real significance was not happen in isolation, that I used a team of other individuals that made that take place. And really, hero makers are those who have discovered that sometimes your success is multiplying through others, not just through yourself. So whether you look at his idea of moving from success to significance, or the idea that really we need a team of individuals, a group of individuals, fellow disciples, mentors, and protégés and others, that's all part of what the Christian life is, isn't it?
Sure is. And one of the things, as we began to work on this book, we not only did our homework on some of the people who were leading churches that were multiplying and discovered that those people really were hero makers, but we also began to look at the life and leadership of Jesus. And one of the places that we came across was in John 14:12. Jesus says this kind of interesting thing where he looks at his closest followers and he says, the things you've seen me do, you're going to do them, and you're going to do even greater things. And so he has this moment where he looks at these 12 kind of guys, this kind of this group of ragtag, fishermen, working class folks, and he says, you know what? You're gonna reach more people than me. You're going to take the gospel to more places than me. You're going to be the ones that are going to catalyze the movement, not me. In fact, you're going to write the best-selling book, the Bible, not me. And he has this dream that he really is. He spent 3 years trying to make heroes, of the gospel of those 12 people who then would multiply that through others. And, now there's 2.2 billion Christ followers worldwide.
Well, again, as you point out, Jesus knew the secret. Of course, you find that in John 14, that you will do greater things than these. But you also then go on to say that Paul knew the secret. And that is, if you look at his letter to the Corinthian church, again, it's this idea that he wants them to understand the gifts of the Spirit, and also wants them to not be uninformed. And again, if you think about the fact that, of course, Christianity goes back to those 12 disciples, in some respects, especially Christianity in Europe goes back to really just one guy traveling with a few others, and it's Titus, and it's, Timothy, and it's Silas, and maybe Barnabas in a few cases, and that. But it's a group of individuals that explode all over the Roman Empire simply because they understood the secret of hero making.
Yeah, and then the secret that Paul was talking about there was that we're a body. And, the heart's really important, but a heart just laying on a table by itself is kind of gross, actually. And we need all the body parts. We need all the body parts to be working together. And so we have to be functioning together to actually accomplish this mission. And so what the heart does is it just exists just for the heart, but the heart, what it actually does is it pumps blood to all the other parts of the body, so those other parts of the body are doing its work. And I think as we apply this to leadership, you are pumping life into all the leaders around you so they can be all that God meant them to be so we can accomplish this mission.
Very good. David Ferguson with us, and as we're talking about this book, Hero Maker, and just before we take a break, you've got a chart there that I think is very helpful. The difference between a hero and a hero maker, and I'll just use one or two examples and get your comments. A hero says, sure, I think ministry happens through my own leadership. A hero maker says, I think ministry happens through multiplied leaders, or even disciple multiplying. I share what I've learned in ways that add my own followers, which is a hero, versus a hero maker. I share what I've learned in ways that multiply disciples. And so if we really want to expand the kingdom, if we really want to make an impact in our generation, we need to move from just being a hero to a hero maker, don't we?
Yeah, and I think there's a shift that I think happens, as you kind of mentioned, they're both internally. You begin to think differently. You begin to think differently and say, okay, it can't just be through my leadership, but through my leadership that's going to be multiplied through others. And you begin to think about multiplied leadership. And as you do that, you also begin to see the world differently, particularly, I think, in church leadership. You begin to look at the people in your small group or your missional community or the people that are sitting in the chairs or the pews of your church, and you begin to realize, you know what? God didn't just have a dream for my life. He's got a dream for how he wants every person out there to contribute to his overall mission of redeeming this world. And so you begin to think differently, you begin to see differently, and I'd even say you begin to pray differently. And it's almost like a good versus best thing.
Yes.
So, I sometimes will find myself saying, God, bless my leadership, and that's a good thing. But what a far greater thing when I say, God, no, bless all these leaders that you entrusted me to, or bless all these people that you've entrusted me, or my family that's around me. Use them. And so there's a subtle shift in thinking that's outward in how I think and how I see and how I pray.
Dave Ferguson with us as we talk about Hero Maker. We'll continue our conversation with him and a little bit later with you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
During this election season, we will once again see how divided we are as a nation. We see a map of red and blue states and even have maps showing red and blue congressional districts. But there is growing evidence that we aren't just a divided country, we're essentially two countries living within the same border. Bill Bishop made this case many years ago in his book, The Big Sort. Americans have sorted themselves into various enclaves that are often so separate from each other that they might as well be different countries. Consider the fundamental differences between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats want to live by their own rules. They hang out with their friends at parks and at other public places. They think that religion and politics shouldn't mix. Democrats watch Sunday morning news shows and late-night television. Republicans go to church. They spend more time with family, get their news from Fox News or the radio, and own guns. Republicans read sports and home magazines, attend Bible study, frequently visit relatives, and talk about politics with people at church. They even differ on their preference of pets. Democrats are more likely to own cats. Republicans are more likely to own dogs. Michael Barone commented in one of his columns that most Americans choose to live in a place that is culturally congenial. Most people in the San Francisco Bay Area wouldn't consider living in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, even for much better money. Most Metroplexers would never relocate to the Bay Area. I lived in both places and can validate Michael Barone's conclusion. Yes, we're a divided country, but we're more than that. We are essentially two countries within the same border, hardly on speaking terms with each other. This is the challenge for any politician in America. Trying to bring people together is difficult when we're essentially two countries within the U.S. border. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Dave Ferguson as we talk about his book, Hero Maker, and it is published by Zondervan. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to daveferguson.org. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But, Dave, before we get back into the book, let's talk about how people can use this. I think initially when you hear about the book, you think, okay, this is a book I'll read if I'm a pastor, a Sunday school leader, small group leader, Bible fellowship leader. But you have a section after each one of the chapters on discussion questions. So it does seem to me that this could be something that you wouldn't just necessarily read as an individual, but you could actually lead an entire small group or Bible study through as well, couldn't you?
Exactly the design there, yeah. One of the things that we do at our church is we call it the big idea. So we'll have a big idea teaching, then we all have the big idea application in small groups. So we wrote the book in much the same fashion. So you can both read it on your own and begin to apply to it. But we think you get a lot more fruitful conversation and kind of ideas about how to apply in your own life when you do it in the context of a group of people, and so that's what that's designed for. Exactly
yes,
right.
Good. Let's, if we can, stay in the section for just a little bit longer about Hero Making Challenge, and one of those is the wrong questions and then the right questions. But even there, you talk about 5 levels of church multiplication: declining, I think we all relate to that; plateauing, but then you have growing, reproducing, and multiplying, and each one is a more significant growth pattern when you talk about 3, 4, and 5, growing, reproducing, and multiplying. But that, I think, helps us understand the kind of questions that lead to declining versus the kind of questions that lead to plateauing or lead to growing or certainly multiplying, because in some respects, the questions we ask maybe also determine the kind of church that we're going to end up with.
That's exactly right. We were fortunate enough to be able to kind of do some homework on the churches across the United States, and they do fall into these 5 categories. And I think your listeners might find it interesting that when it comes to declining and plateauing churches, about 80% of all churches in North America would fall into that category of in decline or plateaued. And then you got kind of these level 3 churches that are growing churches, which make up about 16% of all churches. But then the special category that we were most interested in, this level 4 and level 5. The level 4 we call reproducing churches, and those are churches that are reproducing disciples, reproducing leaders and groups, teams, but also reproducing, maybe a new site or a brand new church. But then the level 5 multiplying are really what we call kind of movement-making churches that are rapidly multiplying at every level. And as we began to do the homework on those, we found when it came to reproducing, there were probably about 4% of all churches that would actually fall into this category that, there's some reproducing happening. But then when you get to multiplying, maybe less than I could put on one hand, and we needed to start going outside the North American context into places like in Africa and India and other places where the church is seeing more growth to get some examples from them. But what we found is that as we began to look closely at those churches, there were a certain set of questions that they would ask that kind of were consistent, that kind of kept them stuck at maybe level 2 or level 3, and versus what you might ask if you're at level 4 or level 5.
Well, and again, when you get to those higher levels, and that moves us from wrong questions to right questions, it also gets us in the difference between addition or exponential multiplication. And you have this arresting illustration there, which I love, because every once in a while I've done that when we've talked about exponential growth, and people just don't live in a place where you have that much exponential growth. But you say, for example, you have 2 people on the first day of a month, each receives $1. Then the first person gets more dollars each day. So, $2 day 2, $3 day 4, $4 day 4, all the way down the line. So you think, okay, well, they're going to do very well. But for the second person, the running tally is a little bit different. On day 2, it triples. Day 3, it quadruples, on and on and on. Well, the number is so large, it's hard to imagine it even fitting into the page. So it shows this enormous kind of explosion, exponential explosion. And when I look at the book of Acts, it looks a lot more like exponential explosion than addition, doesn't it to you?
Oh, yeah. And the illustration you're referring to, if you add $1 every day, at the end of 30 days, you'll, one on top of the other, you end up with $465. But if you multiply it every day, you end up with a number that actually has 33 figures behind it. I'm not even sure I could actually tell you what the number is, but 33 figures. And I think that's the kind of, when Jesus says, I want this movement. I think he was thinking movement to go from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria to the ends of the earth. Yes. He was thinking kind of J-curve growth, exponential movement, and I think we have lost that. One of the things we challenge people, and it goes back to the questions though too, is I think there's been a fundamental question that a lot of church leaders have asked over the last particular 30 to 40 years that really needs to change to go back to a different kind of a New Testament question. And I think the question that leaders have asked and churches have asked more in the last, I'll say 4 decades, has been the question of how do I grow my church? How do I grow my church? Which is a good, and again, it's kind of like the difference of being a hero and a hero maker. It's a good question. It's not a great question. It's good to grow. We want everything to grow. Healthy things grow. But if we're only focused on growing my church, that's far different. And kind of see if this works for you, Kerby, than asking this question: how do we okay?
Yeah, pronoun problem.
Multiply.
Yeah.
Multiply, not just grow. Multiply, not my, but God's kingdom. How do we multiply God's kingdom? Because then all of a sudden you start thinking outside the 4 walls, the doors of your church, and you start thinking kingdom. I have one friend who puts it this way: all of a sudden you start playing, instead of playing, if you're talking about a sports metaphor, instead of playing for the name of the player on the back of your jersey, you start playing for the team on the front of your jersey, which is God's team.
Yes.
Right?
Good stuff. Good stuff. And lots of times people will say, well, what can I do? And I say pronoun problem. What can we do? You know, when you join together with other individuals, you're going to make a greater impact for the kingdom. So let me encourage some of our listeners as they're listening right now. I want to encourage them to get a book, but I also want them right now to think about finding a piece of paper and numbering 1 to 5, because I want them to maybe write down these 5 essential practices of hero making. And they're going to move from multiplication thinking, permission giving, discipleship multiplying, gift activating, kingdom building. And we'll get into those in more detail because each one of them has a practice. Then you have, of course, how Jesus or others were involved in that. And we'll look primarily at some of those. And then you have even a hero making tools. And it's like a dream napkin or 5 steps of apprenticeship or whatever it might be, because that's the core of the book, and there's just some great material. So let's take the first one. Number 1, multiplication thinking. Now, you use Acts 1:8. We've already sort of alluded to that. Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the earth. But talk about what that means, because that's a very key chapter to get us started in the right direction, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think Jesus challenges that last thing he says before he leaves planet Earth. He gives us this great commission, or what we see it in a different way in Acts 1:8, and he even and in so doing, he was being a hero maker, because he's telling these guys, "Hey, this isn't going to happen through me." He says, "You are going to be my witnesses." And in so doing, I mean, he's talking to everybody who's listening in on our conversation. He's talking to me and you, Kerby. You're going to be my witnesses, and you're going to do this, and you're going to equip others to do it, equip others to do it. And so I remember for me when this became real, we got time for a short story on this one?
We certainly do. Again, you want to talk about the napkin, or do you want to do it after the break? We can do it either way.
Let me give you this quick story. A guy named Neil Cole did a workshop, and he told me, he said, take your dream and then multiply it by a million. And my dream at that time was I wanted to lead a church of 1,000 people. But all of a sudden when I multiplied it by a million, it was like 1 billion. He said, now ask yourself, how can you do that? And all of a sudden, it forced me outside of myself. I'm going like, hold on, 1 billion people? I can't do that through one church. I can't do that through my own leadership. I can't even do it through my denomination. And all of a sudden, I go like, oh, this is going to take lots of leaders. This is going to take lots of leadership. Back to what you talked about, it's going to take all of us pulling together. And that billion number was a lot closer alignment to what Jesus' dream was. And I think, so we encourage people in the book, like, take whatever your dream is right now that God has for you, multiply it, we just say by 100. Add 2 more zeros. Now ask, how are you going to do that?
Very good.
And it kind of forces you to think outside yourself.
Fascinating book. And again, published by Zondervan. Probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to daveferguson.org so that you can order it there. Of course, we also have some information about it. And let me encourage you, if you haven't grabbed a piece of paper, number 1 to 5, number 1, we've already looked at multiplication thinking. Now, the tool is the dream napkin. We'll come back and talk about that. And then number 2 will be permission giving. We'll talk about that. And I think you're going to be able to already begin to see the vision for how to begin to make other heroes. Hero Making is the title of the book. Very well written and lots of great material and information. We'll continue our conversation with Dave Ferguson right after these important messages.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dave Ferguson as we talk about his book, Hero Maker, 5 Essential Practices for Leaders to Multiply Leaders. And again, we're talking about a number of things that you can apply. First one, of course, was multiplication thinking. The tool is a dream napkin, and you've sort of already explained that. You say get a paper napkin. It can be any kind of napkin. then really begin to dream and pray and, again, ask the question, can I accomplish this dream through my own leadership? And, Dave, the answer is, if the answer is yes, you need to get a bigger dream. And so your suggestion is to expand it by 100 times so that no longer you're dependent upon yourself, you're dependent upon the Lord. So that's really the key to multiplication thinking, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I had a mentor tell me back in the day, he said, if you don't have a dream that makes you dependent on God, you need to get a bigger dream. And so in so many ways, that's different variety of ways. That's what we're trying to do in that chapter on multiplication thinking. Like, take what you're currently aspiring to do that you're probably thinking you could pull off on your own. Now multiply it times 100. Try to write it out, and we try to give everybody a simple tool you can use that day. We don't want to put it off, right? That day, which is like a napkin, and say, okay, we call it a dream napkin. What's that look like? And now let's ask God to use you in that way through others.
Well, the second one is permission giving. And this is something that comes a little difficult for some, because you talk about all the fears, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of loss of control, the fear of conflict, the fear of financial hardship. But if we're going to be successful, we'll have to give permission. Talk about what that means.
Yeah, a group in the last 2 years came together and they did kind of a whole landmark study on millennials. And one of the things is that they said that kept millennials from really fully engaging in the church is they wouldn't give them the keys. And basically it was this whole idea around permission giving.
Yes.
And permission giving really, if the first one's about a shift in how you think, this is a shift in how you see. You begin to see other people as people who, like, God has given them a unique gift, and there's an important role that they're meant to play to accomplish the Jesus mission. And how do I begin to see them that way and give them permission to do everything God meant for them to do?
Yes. Well, and one of the tools you talk about there is ICNU, which is actually not exactly an acronym, but it is the idea that I see blank in you and whatever, fill in the blank. In other words, I see this ability in you. I see this gift in you. I see God working in you. And that's a place for affirmation. And David, you know as well as I do that sometimes we're not good in the church in giving affirmation, because we say to ourselves, well, they're just going to get a big head, or they're going to get real prideful. And they know that they're working for the Lord, and they know that they're doing the right thing, and they know that this is part of the kingdom. No, they really don't. They need all the affirmation and encouragement and motivation they can get, right?
No, I mean, the church ought to be the place where you feel affirmed, you encouraged and inspired to move on. Yeah, we call that the 4 most important letters in the alphabet, ICNU. And I can remember a conversation that goes back to when I was in junior high. I'm a little dude, 8th grade, summer camp, and there was a guy named Dennis Gamoff, which probably doesn't mean much to your listeners, but to me, Dennis Gamoff was a big deal because Dennis Gamoff had been a high school basketball All-American. He played basketball in the Big Ten, and he was at my summer camp, and we'd been playing softball together. And I remember I left the softball field, and I was on my way to the cafeteria, the dining hall of the summer camp, and all of a sudden I felt this big hand on my shoulder. And I turned around, and there's Dennis Gamoff. And Dennis says to me, he says, Dave, in so many words, I see in you somebody to be a really good leader. And I mean, I still remember that.
Yes,
and I
do.
bet your listeners too. I bet your listeners, if they think back, there were certain people who believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves, and that was a powerful experience. And if we're going to be hero makers, it starts with multiplication thinking beyond yourself. But the second practice here is you got to really believe in people, and then you have to say it. You can't just think it. Now you have to say it, see it in them, and say, I see this in you, and believe more for them than maybe they even believe in themselves.
Yes, ICNU. He uses those 4 letters to actually talk about, the phrase, I see in you. Let's get to the third one, disciple making. And that gets us into kind of apprenticeship and discipleship making and multiplying. We don't have this idea of apprenticeship as much anymore. We have, because of some of these great leadership books, had more and more people talking about discipleship and mentoring. So that's a sort of, if you will, an acquired characteristic. How do we begin to disciple multipliers so that we really have a multiplicative kind of ministry?
Yeah, I think part of it begins with taking seriously the call to be a follower of Jesus. One of the things we did with the book was we began to look at the leadership style of Jesus and how did he allocate his time. And we went to the Gospels and said, okay, how did he allocate his time? Did he spend most of his time with the masses, or did he spend most of his time with the few? Did he spend most of his time speaking to the crowds, like Sermon on the Mount, feeding the 5,000, or did he spend, the bulk of his time training the 12? And what we discovered as we went through the Gospels is that Jesus spent 73% of his time with the 12. Yes. I mean, specifically, if you go through it in events, 46 events with a few compared to 17 with the masses. So like 3 to 1, the amount of time with the few versus the many. And so when you start going, okay, I can't do this myself, multiplication thinking, permission giving, you start having these I, see, and you conversations with these people. But then you start going like, you know what, there's going to be a handful of people just like Jesus that I'm going to invest my life in and give them a vision for doing the same, and then after that, the vision for doing the same. And that's disciple multiplying.
And again, you talk about some of the steps to apprenticeship. Again, this should be intuitive, but again, we don't live around that every day. So step 1, I do, you watch, we talk. Step 2, I do, you help, we talk. Step 3, you do, I help, we talk. Step 4, you do, I watch, we talk. And then finally, step 5, you do, someone else watches. Of course, sometimes people break it down into 3, but the point is that we need to bring people alongside with us. This is why even major successful corporations who might already feel like they have all the leaders they need still have internship programs and all sorts of leadership programs, because if we want to begin to develop people that will be multipliers themselves, they need to come alongside and they need to, if you will, do life with us, right?
Right. In fact, if you go back to Jesus as our model, in John 3:22, there's a kind of little-known verse that if you're reading that chapter, you just run right past it, but it says, Jesus spent some time with them.
Yes.
And when it says spend some time with them, it actually comes from the Greek word diatribo, which is a composite of 2 words, diatribo, dia, meaning to rub, and tribo, against. And it means like literally to rub against or like to rub off. And if you kind of, took it literally, it means Jesus spent time just rubbing off on them. and I think that's what we're supposed to challenge to do. And that's why we like the term apprenticeship.
Yes.
Because it's not focused only on content or curriculum, which can be good, but apprenticeship is, no, you watch me, and I'm gonna show you. You just get right up next to me, and I'm gonna show you actually how to do it.
Well, again, most of us that if we've been effective in evangelism probably learned it when we watched someone else do evangelism. Probably if we're effective in discipleship, we were discipled by someone and we're spending some time with them. And as you point out, look at the amount of time that Jesus spent with the 12 or the 3 compared to the masses, and I think you get a pretty good idea. We need to take a break. Exactly. When we come back, I want to spend some time talking about the next 2. If you're taking your notes, let me just give you a summary. We've talked about number 1, multiplication thinking, and the tool there, of course, was the dream napkin. Number 2 was permission giving, and that's the letters I, C, N, and U. That is, I see this in you, conversation. And then this one, as we just talked about, disciple multiplying, and kind of 5 steps of apprenticeship. We'll come back and talk about 2 more real quickly, gift activating and kingdom building. And we'll also spend just a little bit of time talking about the great resources at daveferguson.org. The website is on there, and you will find some of those resources that would be helpful to you. Number 1, as a leader. But let me again emphasize the fact that at the end of each one of the chapters, there are hero maker discussion questions. There's a section called Open, where there's a couple of questions that kind of start the conversation. Then a section called Dig, which take you into some of the verses, including one we just talked about a minute ago, John 3:22, the idea of diatribo. And then a section on Reflect, on how to apply those. So each one of these would be helpful for you. And so if you're thinking, well, this would be a good book for me to read, that's fine. But I think it would also be a good book for us and your group to read. And so I want to encourage you to not only be thinking about how to become a hero maker yourself, but how to multiply hero makers even in your sphere of influence. And that's what the book is all about. It is published by Zondervan. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a way in which you can order it online as well. And, of course, you can also go to daveferguson.org and find some great resources there, which we'll talk about right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Veterans memorials are symbols meant to remind the living of the service and sacrifice the fallen made for freedom. That is why Gold Star Mothers in 1919 started work on the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial. They did not want the world to forget the sacrifice their sons made, so they, along with the American Legion, erected a cross-shaped memorial. The design mirrored the universally accepted symbol erected over the thousands of graves of men who died in Europe defending freedom. No one complained for almost 100 years. Recently, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit refused to overturn an opinion of a panel of that court that would direct a federal district court to consider whether the monument should have its horizontal arms removed or be razed to the ground completely. Such a decision sets a dangerous precedent for veterans memorials across America. If this decision stands, other memorials will be targeted for destruction as well. First Liberty Institute will appeal this case to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of its clients, the American Legion. I encourage you to go to don'ttearmedown.com and join us in defending this memorial to the 49 men of Prince George's County, Maryland, killed in the line of duty during World War I. We forget what we do not see. Unless the Supreme Court intervenes, the Bladensburg Memorial and similar memorials in close by Arlington National Cemetery may disappear as well. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Again, privileged to have with us today Dave Ferguson, as we talk about his book, Hero Maker, 5 Essential Practices for Leaders to Multiply Leaders. Number 4 is this idea of gift activating, and the tool is commissioning. Let's talk about that for just a minute, because there are churches that have done spiritual gift inventories, but in this chapter, you do warn us a little bit about doing it the right way, not the wrong way. Sometimes gift activation can go the wrong direction, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think because of the programs we have and the slots that need to be filled, we begin to kind of, almost view people as like, okay, how can I get those people into all the slots that I need filled as far as volunteers, rather than going like, okay, what is the unique gift? What are the individual passions that God's put inside people's heart? Trusting that if everybody's using their gifts and everybody's fulfilling the passion God's put in their heart, that the mission's going to get accomplished.
And again, one of the things you talk about is commissioning. And, of course, you can talk about different aspects of that. But what does that look like? Because oftentimes we have an idea of what public commissioning looks like. And you've done that before at your own church. But explain that for just a minute, because that's an essential part of all this idea of gift activating, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and it kind of formalizes to a certain extent, because if you kind of follow where we've been going, hey, first of all, it's multiplication thinking. Okay, I can't do this myself. Then permission giving. You have these I see in you conversations. You begin to say, I'm going to do this through other people. I'm going to invest my life in other people. So then you go to disciple multiplying, diatribo. I'm hanging out with them. I'm doing the 5 steps of apprenticeship. Well, when they're ready, when they're ready to lead that group, when they're ready to lead that team, when they're ready to plant that church, whatever it is that you've been apprenticing them into, I think there's an important part where the leader is ready and you need to be released. And sometimes as churches and even church leaders, we kind of hold on to them because we're afraid, if we release them to do something else, then what about the thing that I need them to do? And but they need that moment of being of release, and that's what we call commissioning.
Yes. Last one, of course, is kingdom building, and what you call the tool is a simple scoreboard. I love what you say there. You know, we all see scoreboards all the time, whether you go to a baseball game or a basketball game, football game, whatever. But your argument is we need a new scoreboard. Explain, if you might.
Well, I mean, my co-author Warren Bird, who's one of the premier researchers in our country, he actually did a survey with some of about I think it was 104 of the leading churches, and began to ask the senior leadership kind of what are the things that they were struggled with. Mm-hmm. And the senior leadership of these churches said one of the things they struggled with was what they would call a scoreboard. How do I know if I'm winning? I know I'm working really hard.
Yes.
I know we're got people showing up, we're raising money, but how do I know if I'm winning or not? And in some ways, I mean, I can remember as a kid going to church where my grandma and grandpa went to church in this little church in rural Missouri.
Yes.
You'd walk in, and on the wall it said it was a wooden plaque, and it would say register. You remember this? Anybody? You remember this?
Oh, I do. Yeah. And when you read that, I said, I've been to those churches where they've got it slides in every, the dollar amount, the number in Sunday school. I've been there. Oh, been there. Go ahead.
Right. And the one my grandma and grandpa said, it was a register offering attendance. It'd be like attendance this year. And then attendance last year, or attendance last Sunday, and then attendance a year ago last Sunday, and then offering last Sunday, and then offering a year ago. And that was kind of the scoreboard.
That was scoreboard.
And I mean, I think there's something to be said for attendance and offering, or sometimes we make fun of it and call it, butts and bucks. But I think we can do better than that. And so one of the things that we challenge everybody to do is let's develop a different scorecard.
Yeah.
And for the individual, why don't we keep track of how many people you're apprenticing, how many disciples you are making?
Very good.
And then set a goal for yourself a year from now and 5 years from now. And we have a real simple scorecard we put in the book so they can keep track of that.
Well, I think it's really good because, again, you're so used to looking at the number of people in the pews or the dollars. And so whether it's attendance or dollars, and again, you can go to almost any pastor, even though it's Thursday, and say, how many did you have in Sunday school on Sunday? And they can tell you, how many do we have in church on Sunday? They can tell you, how was the offering? They can probably tell you that too. How many of them are being apprenticed? How are you doing in terms of your growth potential? Crickets sometimes. And so that's just a very important issue to begin to rethink what the scoreboards are. Well, at the end there, you have a whole section about hero makers get results. And of course, a lot of this is just simply, again, to encourage us to begin to think outside of the box, to no longer be content with a declining or plateauing church, no longer be even content with one that's additive, but one that is multiplicative. And it does seem to me that that's really what you're really challenging individuals to do. So before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about what's available on your website, because first of all, as people go to daveferguson.org, they'll find out information about the book. But more importantly, this is a way that you can maybe be in touch with some of the individuals that would want to either get a sample chapter or they'd like to maybe find out how you've done it at your church, because it is important to recognize that what you did in Chicago at Community Christian Church may be applicable to their church, or they may need to modify it a little bit. So talk about what people will find when they land at your website.
Yeah, if they well, first of all, if they come, and let me just, in the spirit of, we want to do everything we possibly can to make them successful. I mean, it would be very hypocritical of me to write a book called Hero Maker, and for me not to do everything I possibly can to make people who are willing to read this book successful and try to make heroes out of them. So when they get there, yeah, there'll be there's videos that are available to them. There's also, they can download it for free if they haven't yet bought the book. The first couple chapters to kind of get a taste of it if they want to do that. But I'll tell you what, I'll also be willing to do, if you don't mind, Kerby. I'll just give all of your listeners right now my email. And if, as they're reading this, if they want to email me with more questions or kind of saying, hey, how can I apply this to my small group, or how do I apply this to my student ministry, or how do I apply this to a group I'm doing outside the church, I would love the opportunity to help them. And my email is my name, Dave Ferguson, at communitychristian.org. And that'll come straight to me and my assistant, Dave Ferguson, at communitychristian.org. And me and the team of people who will do everything we possibly can to help them make heroes of other people.
Might just mention, too, on our website, of course, we have a link to your website. We have a link to your Twitter feed and a link to your Facebook page. So there are all sorts of ways that people can contact you. And, of course, we have information about the book. Let me encourage you to go to your local bookstore and buy it there if you can. It's in hardcover, but also it's available in Kindle, and we've made that available to you. And, of course, we have a link to, as I mentioned before, daveferguson.org, and you'll find that website there as well. Dave, I appreciate your dedication to making heroes, and I appreciate you giving us an hour in the midst of your busy life to join us today here on Point of View.
Well, hey, Kerby, you're being a hero maker by letting me stand on your platform, so thank you very much.
Glad to do that. That's all we have for today. Let me just mention that tomorrow is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter will be with us, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. Kelly Shackelford will be traveling, so we'll maybe check in with him next week, maybe by phone if we can. But we have a lot to cover, and as you've already noticed, immigration has been front and center, so we'll certainly be talking about some of those issues. But as well, we've got some other topics on the agenda, and Penna Dexter's commentary has been about paid maternity leave, that in large part because of that piece written by George Will, so we'll get into that with her and talk about a few of the other topics we've put on the table. So if you would like to join us tomorrow, I would encourage you to do so. That number, of course, is 1-800-351-1212. If, as you have been listening to the program today, wanted to get some more information, perhaps you have said, this would be really good. I know a pastor that needs to hear about this book, Hero Maker. Is there a way that I could send some information to him? And the answer is yes. First of all, you could certainly just simply forward the link to this web page, which is pointofview.net. Or you could actually download the podcast and send it to him. Or, of course, you could also send a link to the YouTube channel, and that would be another way to pass that on as well. We make available all of this for free, but, of course, you know there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if you can help us out financially, we would appreciate that as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. See you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.